let's now get more insight into the budget. We're joined by Ronald Bosi. He's a group managing partner at accounting firm Ronald's LLP. Great to have you on the show with us today, Mr. Bosi. And let's start off with your overall thoughts on this year's budget. Now, what Kenyans were hoping for was a plan that, of course, addressed the rising cost of living in the country and at the same time ease the country's growing debt burden and ensured continued growth going forward. Do you think this budget did a good job of addressing all those pressing issues currently impacting Kenyans?
Thank you for your question. The budget did both, there was some good that is coming up with the budget, but also there are some challenges that they were experienced, especially in those preparing the budget in addressing the challenges that is facing Kenya for now. Some of the advantages that the common Kenyans are finding from this budget, one is a lot of incentives, especially to promote agriculture in order to revive the economy amidst the COVID-19 recovery program. And then, of course, there's a lot of tax incentives to the pharmaceutical industry in order to enhance the healthcare industry. Also, we have had a big allocation to the education industry in order to help the continued acceleration of the competence-based curriculum that Kenya rolled in the recent past. And of course, there are also security allocation, especially when we are witnessing this year being a year of elections. So there's been allocations into those industries in order to at least cushion the country from security disruptions, especially that comes with the elections. So the only thing that we realize that this year the country's budget is more aggressive in collecting more revenue using the indirect taxes as opposed to direct taxes. So you realize that with the indirect taxes, especially raising excise duty and custom duty, is going to really affect the ordinary citizens, because it will actually going to impact on the cost of goods, therefore not doing any better to the already high inflation that is being experienced for now. Yeah, so it has both advantages and disadvantages, this budget, but mostly, of course, when you're doing budgetary allocation, there's always the revenue constraints, which are there, but then we didn't see a lot of balance in terms of those incentives that will really spur economic growth and really position Kenya as competitively, comparatively with the other African countries.
Right. Well, let's delve further into those taxes, because many expected to see some tax relief, especially on essential items such as fuel. What we did see Treasury do is propose a 10% increase excise duty, as you mentioned, on some products except fuel. What are your views on how effective this will be moving forward, how effective this move will be? And I'm curious to know, did you get any more clarity on the implementation of that national tax policy framework we've been waiting for?
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the trying to lower the cost of living for the ordinary citizen, this budget did not do much good, because the recommendation to introduce excise duty, and of course that excise duty also, there is a lot of the devil is in the details, because the Treasury did not expound all the goods that will be covered by this excise duty. Of course, after the budget readings, the CS Treasurer clarified that it will not cover essential goods, but we wait to see what goods will be impacted that will not accelerate the high level of inflation that is being experienced on the goods this time. But of course, we have had a lot of waivers on import duty, especially on the parts that use an assembly of passenger vehicles. We've had also exemption on VAT for the manufacture, especially for input goods used in the manufacture of passenger vehicles, which is also a very good move, because passenger vehicles are exempt services in Kenya. Therefore, the issue that we had whereby those parts that are used in manufacturing of passenger vehicles were being vatable was very counterproductive, because it really limited in terms of the way of enhancing transportation in the country. That was a very good move. But of course, one of the areas that we are experiencing as a very big disadvantage here is the Treasury to introduce a law that requires that those who have cases at the tax tribunal or who have tax disputes, and those disputes are decided at the tribunal, they are required to deposit 50% of the disputed amount before they proceed to their court of appeal, which we believe this is really going to affect the cost of doing business in the country, because we will ordinarily will expect the Treasury to put up measures to ensure that it cushions taxpayers to explore and actually complete the justice system before they pay any taxes. So requiring taxpayers to pay 50% of the deposit taxes before they exhaust the justice system is quite counterproductive. And of course, other tax measures that also we are seeing in this is also to actually exempt some of the, especially contributions to charity, probably to just accelerate those companies that want to put a lot of money in charity, because you realize that the Kenya's charity industry has been affected because of a limitation on foreign charities in the country and aggressive legislation affecting foreign charity organizations. So this issue of requiring now all contributions to charitable organizations to be exempt in spite of whether those charitable organizations have exemption certificates or not is also really a welcome move. But of course, we wait to see the regulations that are being implemented in the Finance Act to curb any form of tax evasion that will be put in. So I think this budget has had some good tax propositions, but at the same time there are those there's tax propositions that might actually really affect the cost of doing for business. And of course, we saw also the Treasury moving to introduce capital gains for financial derivatives, especially those transacted by non-residents in Kenya, which also increases the cost of doing business in Kenya, and then not positioning the country as a good business decision, especially comparative to other countries that are tax haven. So we hope that there are going to be proper measures to spur now more investment in Kenya through financial derivatives in the wake of this new taxation on financial derivatives for non-resident entities. So again, there are good demerits and merits of this tax legislation that has been introduced.
Well, let's shift focus to, of course, Kenya's growing debt burden. We know one thing Treasury said that this budget aims to bring debt under control. And we are watching Kenya's debt creeping towards that 9 trillion shilling debt ceiling. We saw Treasury propose to borrow about 280 billion shillings externally, 581 billion domestically to fill the budget deficit. Debt servicing costs, they're expected to balloon to 1.39 trillion shillings. So what are your thoughts on some of the measures proposed to cut the country's reliance on debt?
Thank you. You can see that there are measures to cut the country's reliance on debt. But again, this budget still has a very significant deficit of 800 billion Kenyan shillings. So it actually is, there's no way the Treasury is going to avoid debt. But again, the biggest challenge we have is the Treasury planning to borrow more locally in the wake of whereby there is a bit of instability in the interest rates, especially for banks lending to SMEs, because when Treasury is proposing to raise over 500 billion shillings through local financing, then it's becoming a competitor with the local businesses in terms of borrowing from commercial banks. So we don't expect that they are going to be more favorable lending to the private sector, given that the government is also a player in terms of borrowing from the commercial banks. But again, we could see whereby the Treasury is having measures to increase savings into pension schemes and explore those pension schemes to fund the budget deficit, which as a country today, especially in fact the national savings has less than 400 billion shillings, which is very little as opposed to the requirement of 500 billion. And of course, that money has been invested in other real estate. So we don't see that as a very good move, because the local borrowing, which the Treasury seeks to explore more in funding the budget deficit is actually going to affect local lending to the local company, the private companies, therefore not making good, especially in terms of stabilizing the interest rates in Kenya. As it is now, the interest rate stands around 14%. So on average, so you realize that when the government starts borrowing from the banks, the interest rates might move faster, may raise, and expect that the treasury might not actually, the government might lose control of this interest rates because there's already pressure from commercial banks for the government to lift the legislation that cap the interest rates.
Now we are running out of time, but very quickly, let's take a look at the overall economic outlook. Of course, Treasury said that it expects the economy to stabilize at 6%. They say supported by a stable macroeconomic environment. Agricultural output as well is supposed to support growth and a continued recovery in industry and services and manufacturing going forward. Given factors such as the reality of the drought, the upcoming election, for example, do you agree with this outlook?
Yeah, of course, there might be economic growth of 6% as projected by Treasury. But again, what informs the economic growth is what is in question. Because even though agriculture and manufacturing expected to form a major driver of the economic growth, you haven't seen the Treasury put the necessary resources in that, because you realize less than 1% has been attributed to manufacturing of about 10 billion shillings and just 46 billion shillings put in the agricultural industry. We haven't seen the Treasury being more proactive in actually investing in the key drivers of this economic growth. So probably the competition of the economic growth is coming from mostly infrastructure, which the Treasury has actually placed a significant resource of it. And of course, the county government allocations, which you hope a small percentage of it will be used in infrastructure, which then this growth in the infrastructural developments is not likely to impact or even affect the cost of living of especially for the ordinary Kenyans. So yes, we expect a 6% economic growth, of course, which most part of it, maybe the Treasury projects will come from the infrastructural development. It may not have an impact, especially on the ordinary citizens in terms of correcting the cost of living. So that is some of the challenges that we see with these budgetary allocations.